Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast, thanks to your generosity and recording, is to deliver the day 250 of the project. And this is our unified teaching, our unified curricula here at Apocatastasis, where we integrate history, philosophy, languages, and literature in a 1, 2, or 3 year courses, depending on your interest. The only part of the project that we're looking at here being of general interest is the 1 year cycle. For our more serious students who enroll at the college, we have the deeper studies there. But the genius of the project is that we center our study around H.G. Wells's outline of history, which very shortly will be posted on our sub page for the project, where you can watch all the backed classes. And so this is the core, this is the skeleton, along with some appropriate poetry, of which we'll have some shortly. And then, indeed, for those with more interest and more time to commit to this study, this lifelong study, right? This is cyclical. You don't just go through this for 1 year or 2 or 3 years, right? When you finish the 3 years, you start again. It is repetition that is the greatest teacher. Repetition through life, constantly interacting. How do you know somebody in your life? Do you know them by meeting them one time? No. You know them ordinarily, unless it's like a ship going down, or there are some events in life where you can know characteristics, but those are extraordinary. It would have to be some sort of disaster or warfare or something where elements of the soul can burst out in a moment, and there's no double taking what you see. But ordinarily, almost all the time, and in almost all of our relationships, including with knowledge, we know the subject because we are constantly interacting with them over a long time. Over a long time. And that's the same with knowledge. It's one of the great poverties of modern pedagogy, public, private, or home, that we have this idea, oh, we take a class on Spanish. Now we know Spanish. We never touch it again. I took a class on literature in high school, in college, and we never touch it again. And this causes a few problems, of which I can delineate more in the future. But the point is, the project's genius here at the Institute, and it is a unique genius, you're not going to find this anywhere, is providing this distance learning for informal learners who are supportive of our work, as well as as graduated students. We're all quite literally on the same page as we run through the cycles. Eventually, the project will be published as a single set of volumes. In any case, today we have Velasquez and art appreciation. I'll read just a little bit from H.G. Wells after we're through with our poem, and then we'll get into some examples from Velasquez. You really can't read about a painter now, can you? I should point out this recording on Friday, the 9th of May, is going to be a little bit shorter, as on this very day I have my show with Dr. James Fetzer. We're going to talk about various things in the news on this 9th of May. Perhaps we'll bring up the election of the recent Pope, now Leo the 14th, as well as in Russia, their victory over Hitler Day, and all the celebrations there. Unfortunately, a day we used to call it VE Day. I don't think one American in 100 would know what VE Day is nowadays, which is remarkable, especially given the role the Second World War plays in creating this last few chapters of American history. Very, very significant, and indeed very telling of Americans' piety to have forgotten such a significant event. In any case, let me go get my poetry binder. For the sake of time, I'm not going to fiddle around with the screen shares, and we'll see what the muses have in store. All right. And eventually we will have this collection made available. As of now, you can download week 1. Eventually, I think very soon, in fact, we will have weeks 2, 3, and 4 available, and that will be our solid cursus that we will hit. I don't think it's realistic to really be familiar with more than 200 or 300 poems, to be honest. Even if you are reading them every month for years on end, that's still a huge amount of text to attempt to digest. All right, so we're going to pick up with I Sing the Body Electric by Walt Whitman. This is just the last part. It's a meditation, indeed, on the beauty of the body. He published this in 1855. All attitudes, all the shapeliness, all the belongings of my or your body or of any one's body, male or female, the long sponges, the stomach sac, the bowels sweet and clean, the brain and its folds inside the skull frame, sympathies, heart valves, palate valves, sexuality, maternity, womanhood, and all that is a woman, and the man that comes from woman, the womb, the tears, nipples, breast milk, tears, laughter, weeping, love, looks, love, perturbations and raisings, the voice, articulation, language, whispering, shouting aloud, food, drink, pulse, digestion, sweet sleep, walking, swimming, poise on the hips, leaping, reclining, embracing, uncurving, and tightening, the continual changes of the flex of the mouth and around the eyes, the skin, the sunburnt shade, freckles, hair, the curious sympathy one feels with the hand, the naked meat of the body, the circling rivers of breath, and breathing it in and out. The beauty of the waist and thence of the hips and thence downward towards the knees. The thin red jellies within you or within me, the bones and the marrow in the bones, the exquisite realization of health. Oh, I say these are not parts and poems of the body only, but have the soul. Oh, I say now, these are the soul. Tu autem Domine missa de nobis Deum gratias. Thus is Walt Whitman's concluding words and lines from I Sing the Body Electric, very appropriate to our study today of Velasquez and this painter who, of course, needed to learn the human body so well. Also, always good for plugs on top of plugs. We do have a naturist group at ApocatastasisInstitute that's open to the public here in Connecticut. So we do various naturist hikes, nudist hikes, and swims, and so forth, all in the interest of fostering that openness, that receptivity to friendship, to vulnerability, and indeed coming to terms with ourselves in the most stark ways and the most open and friendly ways. So you can check that out, our LCN group. How do you like that for an on-ramp for a plug? Okay, so I'm going to change the screen share here. I'm not going to fiddle with the camera today just because I have the appointment with Dr. Fetzer coming up, and I still have to set up the StreamYard room and the links, and that takes a bit of time, believe it or not. So we'll just have the basic screen share here. Now, we just finished yesterday with a meditation on Louis the 14th, the Sun King, a man who is obviously very interested in art himself. We can see that from Versailles, and indeed from the artist he surrounded himself with at the court. Now we move into this section on art more generally. And H.G. Wells has a section on music, Baroque music, Handel, Bach, of course. Part of the difficulty, just with the platforms we stream on, part of the difficulty with the music is it doesn't really matter who recorded it, but it's very likely this would get taken down for the copyright stuff. And so in time, I hope to find a way around that. But for the moment, I just can't play these great pieces, but you can find that stuff easy enough. English speakers, of course, should know Handel, especially Beethoven we bring up. But as for painting, let's get into Diego Velasquez. Now, I'm reading this from the H.G. Wells text, and I'm just going to read this big paragraph here, and then we'll get into this here. And once again, Google Arts and Culture comes to the rescue. I didn't even know this was a thing, we'll say, with Google, but so it is. Get an example of a Velasquez here. I've seen Velasquez in New York City at the Met, I think it was. They had some. So just an example here. The painting, this is page 661. The painting and architecture of this period, like its music, reflect the social conditions of the time. It is a time of fragmentation for ideas and for power. And no longer do considerations of objects and dignity dominate pictorial art. Religious subjects are relegated to a secondary place. Notice the rise, indeed, as we see here, of portraiture. And where they are dealt with as incidentals in a narrative and not as great spectacular facts. Allegory and symbolic figures decline. Consider that and compare that to the medieval, right? Everything's symbolical. Think about the medieval icons and statuary. The painters now in the early modern period paint for the sake of vision and neither for the idea nor the fact. The picture of reality replaces the heroic or devotional picture, just as the novel replaces the epic and fantastic romance. So what do we see here? We see that the internal world of Western man is changing. And we can see that from the change in art and architecture and literature. The two supreme masters in the painting of the 17th century are Velasquez and Rembrandt. To them it would seem all life was equal, except insofar as it gave them more or less scope for the realization of beauty in atmosphere and light and substance. Velasquez at the decaying court of Spain painted popes and kings without flattery. And, as we'll find out later this class, dwarfs and cripples without contempt. Minute, analytical, documentary drawing of objects gives place in the work of these, the unity of impression, the first of the moderns, to a broad rendering of effect, to a concentration upon unity of impression at the cost of all secondary considerations. Hitherto, in the more centralized life of the past, the picture had been a witness, an exhortation, a flatterer, an embellishment. Now, early modern times, in a great many cases, it become a thing in itself, existing for the sake of itself. Pictures were hung up as pictures, collected into galleries, physical or digital, as we have. Landscape developed vigorously, also genre painting. The nude was painted pleasantly and excitingly. And in France, Watteau, Frangon, and others, delighted and flatter the gentlefolk with delicate apotheosis of the facts of country life. One realizes in these things the evidences of a growing community of secure, prosperous, and quite fine-spirited people, appreciative of life and a little detached from either its magnificences or its sufferings. Right? I mean, this is the rise of the middle class. And so we see a few things here, right? So notice the focus on the individual, the portrait, right? Again, we see the middle class in the Reformation, the individual's relationship with God. Very shortly, we're going to see the individual as the voter or the citoyen. the individual. So we're seeing rising up liberalism. We're seeing rising up the rise of the middle class. And so we see a fineness in taste, but also, frankly, a secularization of interests and a worldliness to their focus. All of this, art, architecture, literature, can tell us. So that was from page 661 of H.G. Wells's Outline of History. Now, let's learn a little bit about Velasquez in particular. And that's the genius of the project here at Apocatastasис. We have this bare bones outline. It's just that, it's an outline of history. And then in our classes, and even on these distance classes, we can get into what might be mentioned in passing. So we have Diego Velasquez, 1599 to 1660. Just want to check the technology, and everything looks copacetic. So Seville, Velasquez was born in 1599 in Seville in southern Spain. At that time, an important city with a thriving artistic community. At the age of 11, Velasquez was apprenticed to Francesco Pancho, Seville's most significant artist and art theorist. Was Seville the one that was washed away lately by uh, uh, super weather weapons? Seville's right. There was I think it was Saragossa actually. The Cortes in Spain voted last autumn to stop sending money to no, I believe it censured Israel. Yes, it censured Israel and stopped sending money to Israel, or stopped sending some weapons to Israel. Which the next day, Saragossa, I think, got it. Seville. Oh no. Okay, so last year was Saragossa, and then recently, the Spanish once again voted to censure, I suppose, the Israelis for their massacre in Gaza, and then the next day, another massive flood came from the skies, and these insane floods. So yeah, Saragossa last year, and then Spain the same, and then Seville. So obviously, it was everyone's favorite client state in the Middle East. All right. Anyway, it looks like Velasquez got out in time. From Pacheco, Velasquez learned the technical skills of drawing and painting. Still life, portraiture, students surpassed at his masters. Unlike the more traditional Pacheco, he responded to the techniques of modern innovators such as Caravaggio, himself famous for dark, dramatically lit works and unidealized models. Copies of his paintings spread all over Europe. In 1617, Velasquez finished his apprenticeship and was granted the right to set up his own studio. A year later, he married Pacheco's daughter, Juana, and by 1621, the couple had two daughters. His early work was religious, such as the Immaculate Conception or St. John on Patmos. Let's take a lookie. Okay. For some reason, this is not that bright. Let's see if this changes here. No, okay. I don't know why. It looks like there's a little kind of film on it. You know how if you like kind of highlight a picture, it gets a bit darker, but that is how it appears. There is no digital film on it. All right, so that's the Immaculate Conception. We'll take another look at St. John on Patmos. Should be loading here on the right. There's a website here they have from National Gallery. .org. Well, this is not loading at all. That's not nice. See what happens if we download. Oh my goodness. See if anything comes up here. All right, so that works. I wonder if this this shows. It should show on the screen when it loads there. I'll take a looky. I think it works. Okay, so St. John and Patmos. I hope that's showing up on the screen share. So yeah, darker. So you can see the Caravaggio both in the Immaculate Conception and here on St. John and Patmos, where it's a darker background. And then you'll notice here they have more in depth. So they have a basic summary here, and then a larger one for each of their parts of their collection. Okay, and Velasquez's rise to court artist. In 1623, thanks to his father-in-law's connections, Velasquez was asked to paint a portrait of the young King Philip IV. Philip was so delighted with the result that he immediately appointed Velasquez as one of his court painters, and from then on would allow no one else to paint him. The move to the royal court in Madrid allowed Velasquez to access the impressive royal collection. Velasquez studied the Italian paintings, particularly those by the Venetian artists such as Titian. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. When Rubens arrived at Madrid on a diplomatic mission in 1628, the two artists become well acquainted. In 1629, Velasquez obtained permission to visit Italy himself and study Italian painting. He also sought out new paintings to buy on behalf of the king. Here's another painting. Shortly after Velasquez returned in 1631 to Spain. So yeah, these unless this is a website error, it does look like these paintings are of a much darker cast. 500 years will do that to the colors. They won't quite pop as they once did. I wonder why that is. This almost looks like a photograph. This is not a scan. In any case, we'll take it up with the webmaster here. And this is entitled Christ Contemplated by the Christian Soul. Presumably this little child here. You'll notice the mention of Italy, and that's of course because that becomes a possession of Spain. The Spanish Habsburgs under at the time of Philip II, the Spanish become very, very much involved in events in central and southern Italy. And so you see more contact between Spain and Italy at that point, including with artists. All right. Now we move to a specific thing we might also associate Velasquez with, and that is dwarfs. It turns out Philip II had a great fondness for dwarfs. In fact, there's a poem about the Battle of Lepanto by G.K. Chesterton where he references the palace of King Philip, where little dwarfs creep out of it and little dwarfs creep in. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to bring to your attention the fact that Velasquez's dwarfs, particularly this painting on this particular subject, looks a lot like the actor Peter Dinklage, himself of short stature. And so people have noticed that a long time ago, that this painting of Velasquez's and this actor here is very, very similar. If you believe in doppelgangers or reincarnation or whatever, there you go. All right. So yeah, Velasquez did a lot of work with the dwarfs. And I'm going to blow this up significantly so that we can read it together in the last part of our class this morning. A little bit shorter class than typical just because of some other broadcast obligations today. Unfortunately, this does not reformat when I blow it up, so we're just gonna have to scroll a lot. One of the biggest questions this author says that I had when I chose to do the formal analysis for the portrait of Sebastian de Mora was, why would Velasquez, why would this world-renowned painter choose to paint a portrait of a dwarf? And what was the significance of dwarfs in the royal court? What I found was very interesting and surprised me. Dwarfs have been employed by royal courts of different nations for a very long time, and it was a common practice for them to serve as attendants, jesters, animal trainers, bookkeepers, and even model stand-ins when the original subject was not available. My thesis is that dwarfs were not considered to be the same as their taller counterparts, and they were used not only for the amusement of the royal family they worked for, but also played a very important role in the daily operations of the royal court of Philip IV. Velasquez is arguably one of the greatest portrait painters of all times. His ability to depict people with such realism and compassion is what sets him apart from others. This portrait of Don Antonio de Ingles, or El Ingles, shows just how small of a man he was. He looks to be only 3 foot tall, slightly larger than the dog he is standing next to. Let's take a lookie. Now we need to zoom out. All right, so this is Don Antonio. El Ingles, Don Anthony the English. Slightly larger than the dog he's standing next to. Dwarfs were commonly employed as animal keepers and trainers, starting with ancient Egypt. In the 17th century, however, they were thought of as playmates for dogs or monkeys, suggesting that they were only considered one step above the animals they interacted with. Compositionally, the painting is balanced with the weight slightly leaning to the left. The dwarf and the dog appear grounded by Velasquez's use of light and shadow. In a similar fashion to his other artworks, the background is painted very plain in neutral grays and browns. Notice how we saw that too in the other paintings, putting the focus on the figures in the foreground. The clothes that Don Antonio is wearing suggest his importance in the royal court. The bright gold and intricate detail Velasquez uses to depict his clothing suggests that he was possibly the lead animal trainer of the royal court. He also has a sword in his left hand, showing that he may have more power than your average dwarf. The boots and hat, with what looks like feathers, lead me to believe that he was above average importance. The detail in his face and clothing place more importance on him than on the dog he is holding. The brush strokes are visible on the dog's chest and face and have a much softer feel to them. His facial expression in the portrait is similar to that of many of Velasquez's dwarf paintings. He looks straight at the viewer with piercing eyes and an expression of defiance. His glare seems to be saying, "Hey, I'm a real person too, and not just here to be your dog's entertainer." So here we go. Let's see if we can get this in another tab. All right, so there's a pride there in the subject, regardless of his height. Here's another dwarf painting. The big old phone book there, Bible probably. Velasquez was arguably the largest dwarf painter of his time. The dwarfs during his tenure at the court painter for Philip IV. So it was Philip II that captured Italy, and by the time you get to his grandson Philip IV, that's when Velasquez is, just to correct myself. The reason dwarfs become popular subjects in his painting is because King Philip loved having dwarfs in his court. In Philip's entourage, at least 110 retainers were dwarfs. This king, wary of normal human contacts, becomes so much dependent on his personal favor, could pamper a dwarf without arousing the envy of courtiers, who were in constant attendance upon him during his peregrinations, his wanderings. Great old-fashioned word there. A dwarf's life was irrelevant. The quote That quote answers my question of how dwarfs were regarded during the 17th century, but also shows that dwarfs were able to be pampered and well taken care of by their masters, quote unquote. This also supports my original thesis, but I would have guessed that their treatment would have been less lavish and more reserved. All right. So we will bring the bird down here. Turn off the screen share. Turn on the camera and recenter. Okay, so there we go. A little bit shorter class today, as I say, but we got our project in nonetheless. We took a look in particular at Velasquez, again, a contemporary of, who did he say? I don't want to guess. The Dutch painter, Rembrandt. Okay, I did guess, but I feel solid there. Right, Velasquez and Rembrandt. Yeah, I didn't want to say Rubens. I didn't think that was appropriate. No, it was Velasquez, a contemporary of Rubens. So we got a look there. We had a little nibble at Velasquez's biography, and then at some elements of his portraiture, particularly the memorable and unusual use of dwarfs in so many of his paintings. Well, they were around the house, so to speak, of Philip IV, of whom Velasquez was a court painter. So there we go. This is Friday, and we're winding things down. We'll be back on the project horse come Monday, please God. And we'll be able to cover all of the pages over the weekend. So about, including Monday, about 10 pages altogether. So with that, thank you so much. You can catch up on all the classes this week using H.G. Wells's Outline of History as our skeleton, and also getting some poetry and painting and so forth in as well. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you next week. Masalama.